Eliza grew up in a small, rundown apartment on the edge of town. The smell of alcohol was always there, clinging to the walls, the old couch, and even the air she breathed. It was a part of her life, like the broken toys scattered around the living room or the TV that was always on but rarely watched. Her parents, Julia and Frank, hadn't always been this way. There were old photos, pictures of them smiling, young and full of life. But those images felt like they belonged to strangers, not the tired, angry people she knew. They were always either drinking or hungover, and Eliza learned early on not to ask too many questions. She quickly figured out when to stay quiet and when to disappear. The nights were the hardest. She would lie awake in her small bed, listening to the sounds of bottles clinking, voices rising, and sometimes things breaking. When she was little, she used to cry and cover her ears. But as she got older, she just stared at the ceiling, waiting for it to stop. One night, when she was about 11, things got really bad. The fight started over something stupid. Frank couldn't find his whiskey, and he blamed Julia. The argument escalated quickly, like it always did. Eliza could hear the yelling from her room, her heart pounding as she tried to shut it out. But then, there was a crash, louder than usual, followed by her mother's scream. Terrified, Eliza crept out of her room. She found her mother on the floor, surrounded by broken glass, her face pale and eyes wide with fear. Her father was standing over her, his face twisted in anger, holding the whiskey bottle he'd finally found. Eliza froze, unsure of what to do. Her mother wasn't moving. Eliza's voice was stuck in her throat as she watched her father slowly back away, his rage suddenly replaced by a blank stare. He didn't even look at Eliza as he stumbled out of the apartment, leaving her alone with her mother. After that night, everything changed. Her mother survived, but she was never the same. She drank even more, sinking deeper into a fog that Eliza couldn't penetrate. Her father, when he was home, was quieter, but there was always a tension in the air, like something terrible could happen at any moment. The violence wasn't as frequent, but it was always there, lurking. Eliza learned to navigate around her parents like a seasoned pro. She knew when to be invisible and when to make herself scarce. School was her only escape, but even that was tainted. She was always tired, always on edge, and the other kids noticed. The teachers would sometimes ask if everything was okay at home, but she always lied. What could they do? What could anyone do? As she grew older, Eliza found solace in books. The library became her sanctuary, a place where she could lose herself in stories far removed from her reality. She dreamed of a different life, one where she wasn't constantly afraid, where she could be free. But dreams were just that, dreams. By the time she was 18, Eliza was exhausted. High school was over, and while her classmates talked about college and the future, she couldn't see beyond the next day. She worked a part-time job at a diner, saving money, but for what? She didn't know. She had no plans, no direction, just the desperate need to escape. Then, one winter night, everything came crashing down. Eliza came home late from work, the cold biting at her cheeks as she unlocked the door. She knew something was wrong the moment she stepped inside. The apartment was too quiet. The air felt thick, oppressive. She found her mother on the floor again, but this time, there was no doubt. She was hurt badly. Blood pooled around her, and her face was pale, her breathing shallow. Her father was slumped in his chair, bottle in hand, oblivious to what he had done. Eliza's heart pounded in her chest as she rushed to her mother's side, her hands trembling as she fumbled for her phone. The 911 operator's voice was calm, but Eliza's mind was racing. She could barely get the words out, her throat tight with fear. The paramedics arrived quickly, their faces serious as they assessed the situation. Her mother was taken away in an ambulance, and her father was handcuffed and led out of the apartment without a word. Eliza sat in the hospital waiting room, her hands shaking as she tried to make sense of what had happened. Her mother was alive, but just barely. The doctors told her it would be a long recovery, and even then, things might never be the same. Her father was in jail, facing charges that would likely keep him there for a long time. In the days that followed, Eliza felt like she was living in a fog. The apartment was quiet now, too quiet. She couldn't stand to be there, but she had nowhere else to go. She started spending more time at work, picking up extra shifts just to avoid going home. But no matter how hard she tried, the memories were always there. pulling her back into the darkness. One night, after a particularly long shift, Eliza finally broke. She sat on the couch, staring at the wall, and for the first time in years, she let herself cry. The tears came hard and fast, years of fear, anger, and pain pouring out in a way that left her feeling hollow, but also lighter. She knew she couldn't stay here. Not in this place, not with these memories. She had to get out, for good. The next morning, Eliza packed up what little she had. She left the apartment without looking back, her feet carrying her toward the unknown. She didn't know where she was going, but she knew she had to get away. The town that had been her prison was behind her now, and for the first time, she felt like she could breathe. It wasn't easy. The road ahead was uncertain, and the scars of her past ran deep. But Eliza was stronger than she realized. She found a small town, a place where no one knew her story, and started over. She got a job in a bookstore, a place that felt safe, where she could lose herself in the pages of someone else's life. As the years passed, Eliza built a new life for herself. It wasn't perfect, but it was hers. She had friends now, people who cared about her, who saw her as more than just the girl from the broken home. She found peace in the little things, quiet mornings with a cup of coffee, evenings spent reading by the window. Sitting in her new apartment one day, far from the town where her nightmares began, Eliza realized how far she had come. She wasn't the frightened little girl hiding in her room anymore. She had faced her past, and though it had left its mark, she was still standing. And for the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of hope, a belief that maybe, just maybe, the future could be better than the past.